lives is a complex of realities. We live, my brothers and sisters, in a society that maintains itself by the tension of democratic and republican opposites that are more like liberal left or liberal right than liberating. It is said that life without hope isn't life at all. It's the state of just existing without purpose or without destiny. To live bigger than oneself is to accept that there is some entity, some force, something greater and more magnificent than human genius and human creativity. Hope is a powerful tool if utilized adequately for the greater good of all humanity. Hope has attributes that the universe respects and fundamentally adheres to. Things like doing good and the hope that good would be returned. Things like treating people with respect and hope that you would have the same respect and the same quality of respect given back to you. Another benefit of hope is that it keeps people vibrant in some of the most horrific realities that they have to live in. People share stories about how their hope has kept them afloat. Dr. Cornel West says, "I cannot be an optimist, but I am a prisoner of hope." Are you a prisoner of hope? Has hope captivated you? You might ask, what is the difference between hope and optimism? Dr. Cornel West explains, hope is about making a leap beyond the evidence that is given to you. Optimism usually looks at the evidence and sees whether or not it's possible to infer that things are going to get better. David in this Psalms is very clear about where his hope is located. He declares without apology that his hope is in the Lord. How does David mature to this level of knowing where his hope is to be deposited? That's a very good question. Before we try to have that answer with David, may I ask a question for you and for me? Where is your hope in 2023? Because if we look at how many people have given up on life and have thrown up their hands in total surrender, you can ask this question, where is their hope located? When we look at Memphis, what is their hope when the system that demonizes black men set as a pardoning privilege to use black badges as the police literally to destroy black lives? James Baldwin shares this insight with us in his assessment of black police officers. Listen to his timeless notes from the Notes of a Native Son. In Harlem, he says, Negro policemen are feared more than whites, for they have more to prove and fewer ways to prove it. James Baldwin also said in an interview not long after that black policemen were another matter to deal with. We used to say, if you just called a policeman, for we hardly ever did, for God's sake, try to make sure it's a white one. A black police officer could completely demolish you. He knew far more about you than a white police officer man could, and you were without defenses before this black brother in a uniform whose entire reason for breathing seemed to be his hope was to offer proof that, though he was black, he wasn't black like you and me. Author Imani Perry said this on Twitter, 2021, the month of April, day number 21. She says this, if you look at African-American newspapers from the very early 20th century, there is an ongoing discussion about the problems with policing, literally nonstop for 100+ years problem. Robin DiAngelo, in her book, White Fragility, says this. She says, the name of the book is White Fragility. Why is it so hard for white people to talk about racism? Listen to what she says. Claiming that the past was socially better than the present is also a hallmark of white supremacy. Consider any period in the past from the perspective of people of color. This is a white lady who is talking about the problem with white fragility. Listen to what she says. People of color have endured 240 years of brutal enslavement, the rape of black women for the pleasure of white men and to produce more enslaved workers. the selling of black children, the attempted genocide of indigenous people, Indian removal acts and reservations, indentured servitude, lynching, mob violence, sharecropping, Chinese exclusion laws, Japanese American internment, Jim Crow laws of mandatory segregation, black codes, bans on black jury service, bans on voting, imprisoning people for unpaid work, medical sterilization and experimentation, employment discrimination, educational discrimination, inferior schools, biased laws, policing practices, redlining and subprime mortgages, mass incarceration, racist media representation, cultural erasures, attacks and mockery, and untold and perverted historical accounts. And you can see how a romanticized past is strictly a white construct. But she says this finally, and I'll close with what she has to say. But it's a powerful construct because it calls out to a deeply internalized sense of superiority and entitlement, in the sense that any advancement of people of color is an encroachment on this entitlement. The past was great for white people and white men in particular because their positions went largely unchallenged. Look at the people of Ukraine, our brothers and sisters in creation and in humanity. Where in the world could their hope be? Because it definitely cannot be in the United Nations, who's designed to protect them from onslaught and terroristic monarchy takeovers and slaughterings by Russia. Having Ukrainians given up their hope, how do you explain their situation from a world perspective? We are in a technology post-modernity age. We want to force people out of their land and then slaughter them for resisting. Look at our very own native home of Africa, in the countless countries for centuries that have been pillaged and robbed of natural resources and forced to live like slaves because capitalistic, white, Eurocentric people and their nations decided they needed to conquer Africa to rule and regulate black people. How do we explain monarchies, ideologies which decide with such barbaric things in 2023? I was a fan of the monarch, so I allowed myself to do some binge watching and watch The Crown. But while I was watching The Crown, the understanding that The Crown didn't understand that while I was watching The Crown, I had the historical data to help me to understand why is it that they thought that because of their skin complexion that they were better than everybody else. I began to understand and listening to the conversations and listening to the exchanges, they felt as though because it was their God-given right to set the standard of what humanity was and is, that they have the right and the authority to do what they did. They believed that it was their God-given right to have authority over everybody else that they considered less than themselves, and even the people that were in their own family. I know it's Black History Month, and I know you didn't really come to hear me talk about us for real. But just in case you did and you tuned in this morning, I want to let you know that we are unapologetically who we are, and we will not ever cower down when God has called us to stand up. Look at our own government. Look at our own political leaders who, in the name of democracy, as a Republican white man loses to a Democratic black man as the Speaker of the House 7 times, but wins 1 time and is still declared the winner. If you don't see no problem in that, then maybe you are asleep this morning. Right in the middle of our face, around the corner, down the street from our church, a black man wins 7 times and the white man doesn't want to give in. But he wins 1 time and then he gets Speaker of the House because he felt as though that it was his duty and his right and his other colleagues that it was right for him to be in that place even though he lost 7 times. My brothers and sisters, we are doomed if we put our hope and place our hope in people and systems, because guaranteed they will fail us every time. For those of you who purport that racism was of the past, that segregation is a faded memory, and that Jim Crow and Jane Crow no longer exist, please tell me that you are still asleep in your coma of forgetfulness. While we have made enormous progress and advancements as people of color, please know that some people are upset, mad as all get out, that by any means necessary, they are desiring to set us back to where we've already come from. They want to set us back from redlining and property ownership to redlining or sidelining us at work. From the regentrification of our communities to tax abatements for big businesses, our neighborhoods, they want us to be set back. From eliminating the middle-class workforce to making the city life unbearable for most, they want us to be set back and put us in projects because they're producing some projects. But they don't know that we serve a God that we've learned by experience, and not only by scripture, but by experience, that we serve a God that will take their setbacks as a setup to blow us up right in the midst of their messiness. The psalmist helps us today by giving us insight into the best place to deposit our hope. David arrives at this level of maturity because of the things he's dealt with in his life. David knows that life is fleeting, a brief slice in time, a whisper that can fade at any moment. David knows pain and disappointment, fear, rage, anxiety, betrayal, guilt, false and true accusations, family fragmentation, and terror. David knows what it's like to be hurt by other people. He knows what it's like to be hurt by systems, and he knows what it's like to be betrayed by those to whom you trust. But David helps us to understand that in this confession, as he's beginning to look at the evil around him in this text, he says, Lord, I want you to know my hope is only in you. And I stopped by here to tell somebody, I don't know where you've misplaced your hope, but I want to encourage you to get you some GPS on your hope and get your hope back in God. David helps us to understand that since his life was in God's hands, he needed to put his hope in God's hand. David says, I need to put my hope there because I know that God is the one who has all knowledge. David proclaims that the destiny to which he's to live is based upon his understanding of God's sovereignty in his life. Therefore, he deposits his hope in that only place. And here is the things I want to share with you that David shares with us. Why does David place his life and hope in God? That's a good question, and I want to try to answer it. Let's look at it this way. David knows that life and death is left up to God's timing. I know we want to live a long life. I know we want a whole lot of things to accomplish. Myself personally have so many things on the agenda, Sister Carla. I don't know whether or not God's going to let me live long enough to do it. But I got so much I want to do, so many things I want to write, so many places I want to go see, so many handshakes I want to make, so many sermons I want to preach. I don't know if God is going to let me do all of them. But if the Lord does not let me do all of them, I do know one thing. I do know where I'm going. I wish I had somebody in here who understands that. Right? Because no one else controls life but God. And even though sometimes we don't understand that God's timing is not our timing, we also have to also understand that when we got our business together with God, we can do more than just dream. We can be a reality. In other words, my brothers and sisters, since life is so fleeting, do the best you can with what you got while you can, because God is still going to take care of you no matter what the situation you find yourself in. All of us got a birth date and an exit date. And your hope needs to be in the one who has that control. Not only David helps us to understand that life and death is in God's hand, but David helps us to understand why he places his hope and life in God, because David knows that God has the power to sustain his life and his hope. God has unlimited abilities to maintain us through every situation. I want to tell our officers and our leaders, I want to tell you this, and I want you to be encouraged, that God has the power to help you lead and to help you do your work in the ministry. God has the power to help you do everything that you think you cannot do. Some of us, if we're honest, know that if it had not been the Lord helping us do what we do, we could never do what we've already done. And if we're going to continue to do more, it's going to have to be, our hope has to be in the one who gives us the power to get stuff done. David knows that God has demonstrated that even though the weapons may form against you, they shall not prosper. I like that about God, Because God has a way of what I call always having the last move on the chess game of our life. Even though it seems like life has got us in a bind and sometimes it feels like things have got us up against the wall, but God always has a way to help us to escape the stuff that the enemy wants to bring our way. If I had one witness, somebody ought to say amen.